For my third exploration activity, I attended a church service at Faith, Hope, and Love Fellowship in Creighton, Nebraska. This experience was different from my own religious background because I was born and raised Catholic, and I had never attended a church service outside of Catholicism before. The purpose of this assignment was to experience a group different from my own and reflect on what I learned about the group and myself. At first, I honestly had a difficult time finding an activity because I live in rural northeast Nebraska where there is not a lot of visible diversity. And while I wish I could have had access to something entirely different from what I'm normally used to, the opportunities around my area were just very limited. However, while I was researching options, I was surprised to see how many different churches are actually in my small community. I chose this church because the service was on a Sunday morning at 10:45 and it was within walking distance from my house. When I first arrived, I immediately noticed differences from what I am used to in Catholic Mass. In my Catholic church, we usually genuflect before sitting down, make the sign of the cross with holy water when entering, kneel during parts of Mass, and make the sign of the cross before and after prayer. At this service, none of those things happened. There were also no pews, only chairs, and there was no communion or altar servers. The pastors were not wearing white robes, and really, the overall environment felt much more relaxed than what I'm used to. One of the biggest differences for me was that the pastor was a woman. In the Catholic Church, we do not have female priests, and our pastors are usually referred to as priests or fathers. Seeing a female pastor made me feel happy and excited because that is something I have personally wished was more acceptable in Catholicism. She still preached from Bible readings and scripture, but her style felt easier for me to follow. She used real-life examples, such as comparing different types of dogs and their roles, like cattle dogs, hunting dogs, seeing eye dogs, and rescue dogs, to how Christians are called to listen to and serve Christ in different and unique ways. That comparison really helped me understand the message in a more practical way. I also noticed that the service was more interactive. The pastor asked the congregation questions and people responded. They still said amen, and it was still clearly a Bible-believing church, but the structure and tone were very different than what I was used to. At first, I felt uncomfortable and out of place. I sat toward the back so I could watch what other people were doing and kind of follow their lead. I found myself checking whether I was dressed appropriately and paying attention to whether others were kneeling, genuflecting, or making the sign of the cross, things like that. And since they were not, I didn't either. And looking back, I realized a lot of my discomfort came from my own thoughts and assumptions. I was worried people would notice I was new or think I didn't belong, especially in a small town where people recognize unfamiliar faces. However, no one said anything negative or made me feel unwelcome. Most of the discomfort I felt was internal. This experience made me realize that I tend to associate structure with correctness in religious practice. And when that structure was removed, I initially felt like something was missing or wrong. However, as the service continued, I began to recognize that meaningful worship can look very different depending on the community, and that my perspective had been shaped almost entirely by my upbringing. As the service continued, I became more comfortable, especially when the female pastor began preaching. I appreciated how relaxed and welcoming the environment felt. Even though there was still very little racial or ethnic diversity in the room, this experience gave me a different perspective on religious diversity and helped me realize how much my own Catholic background shapes what I expect worship to look like. This aligns with what we learn in counseling about cultural competency, where understanding a client's background, including religious practices, is essential to providing effective and respectful care. If I were counseling someone from this religious background in the future, I would need to avoid assuming that all Christian clients practice their faith the same way. Even within Christianity, there are major differences in leadership, worship style, gender roles, rituals, and expectations. I would need to ask respectful questions, listen without judgment, and understand that what their faith means to them personally rather than relying on my own experiences. I would also need to practice cultural humility and remain aware of my own biases, recognizing that something unfamiliar is not wrong. It's simply just different than what I'm used to. Overall, this experience expanded my perspective by helping me step outside of my comfort zone. It showed me that religious differences can exist even within the same small community and even within the broader Christian Bible-believing faith. It also helped me become more aware of my own assumptions, discomfort, and personal growth. I left the service feeling more open-minded and appreciative of different ways people can connect with God and express their faith, and it really encouraged me to remain curious and open to exploring perspectives that differ from my own. I even found myself wanting to attend services at other local churches to explore their similarities and differences from what I'm used to, and to see if one might resonate with me more